All right. So we are in, like I said, the book of Mark today. We're in a series entitled Balance, right? We've been walking through just a starting point of what it means to live a lifestyle of stewardship in our lives. And who would agree with me that we like stuff? Anybody like stuff? Come on. Now, don't make me go look in your garage, because that'll tell the true tale, right? We like stuff. We all like stuff. It's one of those things, and society understands that, don't they? Because they have made shopping so easy, haven't they? Oh my goodness, shopping has gotten so easy. It's just like you can run to the stores. It used to be you had to go to the stores between certain hours before they closed. Now there's some stores that are 24 hours a day. It doesn't matter. You can go to them, right? But even better than that is Amazon, right? Everybody loves Amazon, don't we? It's just an amazing thing. You know, it's like you almost get to that page, some of us, and we're just like, God, if you want me to have this, I'll click and see what happens. And of course it's going to happen, right? But we try to justify it out. We like stuff. That's the bottom line, don't we? We love stuff. We really do. Did you know that in the Bible, all of the Bible, from Genesis to Revelation, all 66 books, throughout the Bible, God talks about the subject of money and possessions over 2,000 times. Wow. Actually, the total number is really closer to 2,300 times. And some of you are like, what, is God really into stuff and money that much? No, but he knows we are, right? You're like, I am not into stuff. You are so into stuff, and you know it. You know you are. It's actually inbred in us. And he knows that stuff kind of has us, doesn't he? He understands that we get caught up in that. And if you've ever been a parent, you know what I'm talking about, because one of the first sins, if you will, that you ever see in humanity is seeing about an 18-month-old toddler, right? And when that toddler sees something somebody else has, what does that toddler do? They walk over, they grab it, right? And what do they say? Mine, right? It's mine, and it's mine. And I hear so many mines during that age group. It was just like crazy for me. Of all the things that is the first revelation of this idea of sin in our lives, and it is selfishness. It's in us, isn't it? It really is. And since God knows that money and stuff is probably the number one competition for your heart, then we couldn't be talking probably about a more important topic than to talk about possessions and stewardship of things in our lives, right? You're like, of all Sundays, I came on the one he's going to talk about that stuff. Oh my goodness. No. To be honest with you, if you're new with us or if you're online watching for the first time with us, I haven't spoken on stewardship and tithing and money in 2 years, okay? So it's not a normal topic, but I do believe it's a topic worth talking about, right? And that was all the folks who were good with tithing. So, I'm actually not even going to talk about tithing, to be honest with you. Last week we talked about a lifestyle of stewardship, didn't we? Living our lives out, everything we do as unto the Lord, realizing that it is really unto the Lord. This week I want to talk to you about living in abundance. Everybody likes stuff, so this ought to be a good topic for you, right? Living in abundance is a good thing, right? Okay, well, hang on, buckle your seatbelts on, all right? In Mark, we're going to go to the 6th chapter today. He records the details about what I would consider to be one of the most amazing, not the most, but one of the most amazing miracles recorded in the Bible. It's the feeding of the 5,000. And I want to give you a little context for 5,000. So in those days, when they counted heads, they counted male heads, right? They didn't count female heads for some reason. They counted male heads. And so when they say that there was 5,000 in attendance, there was 5,000 men, and for every man there was probably a wife, and for every wife there was at least 1 or 2 kids, right? Or 6 or 7 or 8. We could also say that maybe about the wives too, but we won't go down that road right now, will we? So really we can estimate there might have been somewhere around 20,000 people that had been involved in this story in Mark chapter 6. I'm going to pick it up right there. Mark chapter 6, we're going to start reading in verse 34. If you don't have your Bibles, follow along. It'll be on the screen for you here. It says, when Jesus landed, and I like that right there, okay, because so the person who may not have a Bible knowledge may think, wait, he landed? Was it a plane, a spaceship? How did he get here? No, he was in a boat, okay, just context. When he landed on the shore and saw a large crowd, he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. So he began teaching them in many things. And by this time it was late in the day, so his disciples came to him, and they said, this is a remote place, and it's already really late. Send the people away so that they can go to the surrounding countryside and the villages and buy themselves something to eat. So we're going to stop right there for just a second. When you think about that, the disciples are going, look, Jesus, this is going to get really kind of ugly around here. It's getting kind of late. It's getting dark here pretty soon. These folks are going to get hangry. And we don't like hangry. So you're going to need to send them off to go get something to eat. There's a lot of people here. There is no way that they're going to hang out and keep on listening to this. You need to send them out, all right? And Jesus looked back at them and he answered and he said this. He said, you give them something to eat. Oh. And they thought for a second and they said to Jesus, that would take more than a half of year's wages. Are we to go and spend that much on bread and then give it to them to eat? And here, in this point right here, Jesus asks a question that I really pray that each of us get to asking ourselves today. He looks at him and he says, how many loaves do you have? And Jesus asked, go and find out. Because these guys are like, loaves? I don't got any loaves. We didn't come with a lunch. We got nothing. And he says, go and see. And when they found out, they said, we have 5 loaves and 2 fish. 5 loaves and 2 fish. Within this story, we find 2 different mindsets of how to deal with opportunities that are presented to us from God. There is the mindset of scarcity, and there's the mindset of abundance. So when we're thinking of this, the disciples were thinking from a scarcity mindset. They were thinking, buy. What can I buy to feed these people with, right? But Jesus, on the other hand, he was thinking, give. What do we have that we can give to the people? The disciples were thinking scarcity, and Jesus was thinking abundance. Do you see that? You understand the difference there. The disciples were merely in a mindset of, I got to have money to do what I need to do, and Jesus is saying, you have what you already need, just give. Jesus was viewing what was available through a huge different lens than the disciples were looking at it through, wasn't he? The disciples viewed this mindset through the first of those 2 mindsets, through the scarcity mindsets. And they were looking through that mindset and just really freaked out by the thought of trying to provide food for almost 20,000 people at this. And so the first mindset we're looking at is called the scarcity mindset. And that mindset declares that there's not enough. There's not enough. It's just impossible. It will never happen. It's not enough. It's not going to work out. And that mindset is something that grips all of us. And here's what happens in that mindset. Check it out. I want to have a diagram up here. In this mindset, what we see is that God supplies what we have, right? And then we consume what God has given to us, correct? Then once we get it all consumed, what do? We're in lack. And when we're in lack, we begin to become fearful. We get into fear. And because we're in fear, what do? We consume once again. And we're in lack and we're in fear. And it just continues to go a little bit crazy on us. Why? Because our mindset says there's not enough. So I got to consume everything I can to make sure I get my parts. And we find this evidence in the Gospel of John, chapter 6 as well, in verses 7 and 8, where John records the same event. He records the same story, but he has an element there that he caught that we didn't see in Mark. So if you flip over to John chapter 6, we'll look at that real quick. And what he puts in his notes there is that Philip and Andrew had a response. And so here's what we find in verses 7 and 8. Philip answered him, it would take more than 1.5 years' wages to buy enough bread for each one to have a bite. He's saying, we don't have enough. There is no way. It's impossible. We will never make it happen. And then all of a sudden, Andrew, he had a response. And he says, he's Simon Peter's brother. He says, Andrew, Simon Peter's brother, spoke up. He says, hey, here, I found a boy with 5 small barley loaves and 2 fish. And then he throws it out there. But how far is that going to go among so many? They're saying, look, there's very little here to be had. We searched everybody around and asked for everybody to bring what they had, and this is all we got. We got 5 small loaves. We've got 2 fish. It's kind of like a Long John Silver snack pack, if you will, right? There's not much there, and they're like, Jesus said, this might be good for you, but for anybody else, this is all we got. You ever felt that way in your life? When God puts something before you and you're like, but God, that's just not going to be enough. You ever been in that situation? There's always more month than money. Anybody feel that one? Or maybe you're right on the verge of getting ahead financially in your life and then a major medical bill shows up, right? And you're like, oh, God, how am I going to do that? Or a furnace on your home suddenly goes down and you're not going to have the money to take care of it. And it's the middle of winter. Or you got in a car accident just a few days earlier, right after you forgot to pay your insurance premium. God, there's not enough, right? The scarcity, here's what we need to begin to understand. The scarcity cycle begins where? In the mind, not in the wallet. This mindset that grips us starts right here. It starts with a fear that God's not going to provide for me, and it starts and it gets a hold of us, and it's really a hard one to let go of. See, the mindset, that scarcity, it says within us is there's not enough. And I fear some of us may be in that area today. Jesus, on the other hand, was looking at this through feeding the 20,000 people. He was looking at it through an abundance mindset. And the abundance mindset that Jesus had is that there's more than enough. See, the disciples were worried about how to take care of it and buy, and Jesus was like, we got everything we need. It's all good right here. We're going to get it all taken care of. See, when we look at an abundance mindset versus a scarcity mindset, and we look at the cycle that happens with it, here's what you find out right here. Check this out. What happens is God supplies. We give because that's what we do. God multiplies what we gave. What happens when you give and God multiplies us, what we've given? Our faith grows, doesn't it? Anybody out there ever have your faith grow because God provided when you knew that you were hopeless without it? Your faith grows, and when your faith grows, what happens? You get really excited again, and so what do? You continue to honor God and give. And so then when you give, God multiplies again, and your faith grows again. And it's this cycle that begins to happen. And you can see how the two mindsets can really be so far apart from one another. Jesus' mindset was, we've got everything we need. The disciples' mindset was, this Long John Silver snack pack's really not going to do the deal. But he knew something nobody else knew. In Matthew chapter 14, verse 20, he also recorded a part of this story down. And in this story that he recorded, he writes this out. He says this, and I love this. He says, they all ate and were satisfied. He didn't just say everybody got a piece of bread. He didn't say everybody got a morsel. He said they all ate and they were all what? Satisfied. Now today when you go out for lunch after church, you're going to eat and you're going to feel satisfied, right? Some of you are going to eat and wish you hadn't eaten so much and be unsatisfied at that, right? Because you are going to be satisfied. There's that moment when you get satisfied. It wasn't just that they ate something, they had a morsel. They were literally satisfied. Their hunger was taken care of. And it goes on and says, and the disciples, they not only, this is just a marvel to me, they picked up 12 basketfuls of broken pieces that were left over. Now, how in the world do you get 5 loaves, small loaves, the word says, and 2 fish, and end up with 12 basketfuls? Now, when you're thinking of a basket and they're thinking of basket, there's 2 different types of things there. Because in those days, basket were transportation for like your grocery cart. It was like a basket. And there was 12 basketfuls left over. Part of me wonders, and we'll never find it in Scripture, did Christ make sure that there was 12 basketfuls left over so each disciple had one and could feel like the fool? I don't know. That's just kind of what I think. But we'll never find that one supported in Scripture, right? The 12 basketfuls left over. How do you get 5 loaves, feed 20,000, and end up with 12 basketfuls of food left? We're going to talk about that. That's an amazing thing. Scarcity asks, what can I afford? Right? Abundance asks, what do I have? I'm going to say that again. Scarcity asks, what can I afford? Abundance asks, what do I have? And there is a unique difference because there's always way more where that came from. And we have to keep that in mind. I heard a pastor tell a story. This isn't my story. I heard a pastor tell a story of a lady whose name was Kelly. She was a single mom, had 2 kids, really been trying to scratch out a life for her and her 2 kids for a while now, and had a small apartment, but she had 1 bed, and she didn't want her kids to sleep on the floor, so she made sure the kids slept in the bed, and she slept on the couch. And there was a couple within the church that she was attending who happened to catch wind of her situation. Her name was Stan and Libby. And Stan heard about this and thought to himself, you know what? We can do something with this. And so he actually had some beds for kids in his home. And he thought, we can, out of what we have, we can go take care of this need right now. So he and Libby talked about it, and they decided they were going to take those beds over to the Kelly. And so they packed them up, and while they were packing, Stan looks at Libby and says, you know what, I bet she doesn't have a dining room set either, so let's take a table and chairs so that they can have family dinner together. And so they packed it all up. They called and set up a time, came over, dropped it off with Kelly, got it all set up, left it with her, and she was so overwhelmed. Kelly was so overwhelmed. It was just an amazing moment for them. And Stan and Libby really got excited and felt wonderful about being able to provide out of what they had. It was just an incredible moment. And they left, went home, and a little while later, Kelly calls, and she was just overwhelmed and in tears. And she says, I just pray that one day I would be able to do something like that for somebody else. It blows me away. I'm just so overwhelmed. I'm so blessed. And Stan says to her, he says, you can do it now. You don't need to wait. You don't have to be rich to do something God puts before you to do. You can do it now. And they hung up, and Kelly was thinking for a little bit about what could she do? Is this true? And then she remembered that a couple doors down in her apartment, there was a single mom who had just had a baby, who had no rocking chair. And she looked across her living room and remembered she had a rocking chair that she wasn't using anymore because her kids were too old. And she thought, I can do that. And so she went and grabbed the rocking chair, walked down the hall and knocked on the door and asked the lady if she could give her and bless her with the rocking chair. And what Kelly found out was that what she had was already there that she could bless somebody with. She didn't have to wait for something greater to be a blessing. It can't be this idea that when I get more, I'll do something for God. You know, I've heard folks say that. When I finally get to where financially I'm stable and I got enough to do it, then I will start honoring God and blessing and following His leading. And let me just tell you this right now, that if you can't do it with little, it's going to be much harder with a lot. There is something about it that when you can't get that principle, it gets harder when the money or whatever it is, the things become greater. It becomes tighter. The grip gets tighter on everything around you. And see, what I want us to understand is that in God's economy, it's very different to what the world considers to be an economy, isn't it? Where's all my folks out there who understand the principles of giving and what the Lord is doing in their lives? When we follow Jesus, He completely redefines what can be done with what we would consider a little, doesn't He? I mean, we see it over and over in the Bible. Talk about the story of the widow's mite and so many other ways. Let me show you something, all right? I want to tell you exactly what's possible with a little bit. Okay, I have a $5 bill here, right? Everybody likes money. No, I'm not handing it out this time. I've done that before, not this time. This is what some would call a little, isn't it? It's okay, you can say that. It's not a bad thing. $5 is a little. Is it a little or a lot? It's kind of a little when considering much more. I could buy maybe a McDouble. No, actually, I know for a fact, okay? I know for a fact I can buy a McDouble hamburger with no pickles and extra onions and a small fry for $4.99. All right, I know for a fact, for some reason. That just popped into my head. I don't know why I know that. Yeah, I do know why I know that. Right? It's not a lot. It's just a little bit. You know, I could go to a movie and buy some candy. It's the boxes of candy are things they give. And most of you know what I'm talking about because when you go, you go to a store ahead of time, buy the cheap candy, and you carry it in your pockets because you don't want to pay the big prices, right? Come on, you know it's true. Pastor's being real, right? Last month, we handed out the Obria Clinic little coin banks. You remember those? Many of you turned those in. Thank you for that. I brought one up here. It's my area's getting messy. Brought one up here, and you see it up there, I think. Yep. We did this, right? And many of you filled these up. Thank you so much. It was such a blessing. The average idea of what comes in these usually is around $5 to $10, right? And on its own, it doesn't seem insignificant. In fact, many of us, usually what we're doing is we're tossing in our spare change we might have. You know, there was some that came in, and we don't open them, so we don't know. We just handed them off. But there was like one item in there, and you shook it, and it was a check. And I'm like, ooh, somebody put something in there. But the average is typically $5 to $10. And when we look at that, for $5 to $10, it doesn't seem like much. It's just our loose change. It's what we had left over. It's a whatever kind of a thing, right? Sat on the counter for us, and we kind of put some money in there, right? But when you take those and you start adding it to what you did and what you did and what you did and what you did and what you did, and as you turn those in, you're talking $200, $300, $400, $500 worth of coin banks that got turned in. It doesn't seem much while sitting on your counter or on your dining room table, but when it's combined with what everyone else is doing, it turns into hundreds of dollars. And when that's combined with what the other churches in our community did, it turns into thousands of dollars. But it was insignificant in your place. That was just your spare change, right? But with what everybody did together, it became significant, and we're able to buy like ultrasound equipment so that these mothers who have a child inside of them can actually look and see the baby and understand that's a life. That's real. It's alive, and watch their baby move. And you know, it's because of that insignificant thing that you did in tossing your spare change in there, maybe $5 with, that suddenly helped transform somebody's life and save a baby's life. A little can do a lot, can't it? That would be a great place for an amen right there. See, that's what a little can do. And if we view life through the lens of scarcity, if we see it as what can I afford, we're going to always be fearful. We're going to always be anxious. We're going to always hold back. And Jesus has such a much different plan for you in your life, so much greater than you ever think. John 10:10 says, the thief comes only to steal, kill, and to destroy. But Jesus said, I come that you may have life and have it what? Abundantly. I've come that you can have it abundantly. Everything about God is excessive, isn't it? Everything about God is extravagant. It is more than enough in God's economy. Why do so many people in our lives today miss out on the abundant life that God has for us? I'm going to share with you two reasons of why we miss out. The first reason is, if you're taking notes, write this down. And first, if we fail to understand that God multiplies what is blessed. Did you hear that? The first thing we miss is when we fail to realize that God multiplies what is blessed. Back to our story in Mark chapter 6. You got your finger there? Go back there. It says they sat down in verse 40. They sat down in groups of hundreds and of 50s, and he took the 5 loaves, and he took the 2 fish, and looking up towards heaven, he what? He blessed the food. Now, here's a great example of what I'm talking about. Having a blessing on something is really what we want, right? That's really where we want to be. We want God's covenant blessing on our lives. One of the great examples of how God multiplies what is blessed and blesses what is first is done in the area of returning the tithe. Because when we return the tithe, it releases God's blessing on the remainder that's left, doesn't it? That's what a blessing does, is and it's evidenced in our tithe, that when we give it, it releases God's blessing upon it, right? And Teresa and I, just in our life, just so you know, we firmly believe that 90% of what we make blessed by God is going to go so much further than 100% without His blessing. Is there anybody in the house that would agree with that one today? That's the way it is. That's the promises, the covenant of God on that. And it's just a good example of what I'm talking about, that God multiplies what is blessed. How many of you want things multiplied by God? Anybody want some multiplication? I'd much rather have multiplication than addition, wouldn't you? And even worse, subtraction, right, or division. I want that multiplication. And that's what happens when God blesses something. It transforms and changes what is happening around us. And that's not just money, talking about stewardship of life, like we talked about last week, right? Let's look over at the book of Malachi. And let me give you a little context for Malachi. We're going to look at chapter 3 today. And Malachi is a minor prophet. There are major prophets, there are minor prophets listed out there. And he's one of the last 3 prophets that God used before the birth of Christ. And he was speaking to the people of God through Malachi as the voice of God. And so when he spoke to him, and Malachi put this down on paper, here's what he said in Malachi chapter 3, verse 10. He says, "Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse." Now, people have said to me, yeah, I know what a tithe is. The tithe is 10% of my income, right? No, it's actually, if you look scripturally, it's the first 10% of your income. You've seen it over and over Scripture where they brought the first fruits, right? The first harvest of their labor, the first lamb to be sacrificed, the firstborn to that particular ewe, right? See, it's not just tithe. If it was just a tenth, a lot of times we're very tempted to do this. We're going to be like, okay, so I'm going to pay all my bills and we'll see. We got 10% left? No, we got 3.5% left. Okay, well, we'll give 3.5%. God says, I want you to give the tenth first, and then let me take care of blessing the rest. Because what God multiplies is what's blessed, right? He'll take a blessing onto that. Malachi 3:10, back to there, sorry. He says, "Bring the whole tithe into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house." And I love this part right there. He says, "Test me in this, says the Lord Almighty. See if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven. See if I will not throw open the floodgates of heaven and pour out so much blessing that there will not be room enough to store it." And I want to focus in on one simple 3-word phrase, the floodgates of heaven. There's a real unique imagery that's painted here, right? It's the word that's in here is used 4 times in the Old Testament that describes the floodgates of heaven, words that mean certain things. The word that's meant the floodgates of heaven is used 4 times. It's used here in Malachi, it's used in the book of Isaiah, and then it's used twice in the book of Genesis when talking about Noah and the flood, right? Floodgates, in that word, the way that it says, this is how God chose to illustrate the blessings that are going to be given. He says this right here, it's an absurd amount. It's when you think about the flood on the earth and Noah, was there any part of the earth that wasn't covered? I'm going to say that again. Some of you didn't quite get the question. Was there any part of the earth that wasn't covered in water? No. So when he poured out the floodgates of heaven, the same word is used here that's used in Malachi, upon the earth to flood the earth, there was nothing left uncovered. There was that much water. Imagine our earth not having any dirt showing anywhere. That's a lot of water, right? So that's the word he's using when he's talking about blessing the tithe. God says there's more than you can imagine, and it's held in reserve within heaven like a massive lake, like a behind a dam, ready to be bursting forth and released upon us. See, God is not stingy with what He has and what He has for us. He's not saying He's only going to bless us if we pay up. That's not our God. He doesn't need our money, does He? What God is saying that He can trust us. He can trust us with the abundance of heaven when our faith shows that He is first. That's what He's looking for, is stewardship in our lives. Stewardship in our lives, like we talked about last week, with our attitudes. Anybody get an attitude? Anybody probably do something we talked about last week? Right? Stewardship of our lives. It plays over into our finances, but it also plays into our daily, every day walking around, pulling on your pant legs, one leg at a time life. What God is saying is He can trust us with the abundance of heaven when our faith shows that He's first in our lives. And how many of you know that He's either first in all of our life or He's not first at all? What is heaven? What is the floodgates of heaven? No, it's not Wall Street, your local bank, not the lottery, definitely not the government. The floodgates of heaven is the undiluted presence of God. Think about that. We experienced a little bit of the presence of God today in worship, didn't we? And it was wonderful. Now imagine just an undiluted deluge of the presence of God in your life. Overwhelming peace, uncontrollable joy, an amazing amount of abundant provision in your life in any area. And some of you are thinking to yourself, is that even humanly possible? It is. The Word describes it. We had a gal in our last church. Her name was Alex. Alex had been attending a church, not our church, for years. And it was out of duty that she was doing it. It wasn't out of heart relationship. It was out of duty. And somebody befriended her and ended up inviting her to come, and she began to understand a little bit of what God had for her. And she began to understand what being a steward in her life was. See, her life belonged to God, and she began to understand that she needed to begin to put God first in every area of her life, which she had not been doing ever before. She broke off an inappropriate relationship. She worked on her faith journey, began to get into small groups where she could really learn some things about living her life for God. She began to put God first in her finances. And she said this to me when she was talking to me once about it. She says, I feel so close to God. I just feel so close to God. She said, I've never, ever felt His presence like I feel it in my life every time I come and I'm around God's people here. She said, I am just touched. Once I put God first in every area of my life, everything changed. She said, I step into the church and I just start crying. And she literally did, walking in the doors. The overwhelming, undiluted presence of God was so on her that she'd step in the doors and just begin to cry. She walked in and cried all the way through service and cried all the way through the message because she was finally in the undiluted presence of God. That stewardship, that complete commitment, that complete, I surrender everything to God. And she said, His presence has totally overwhelmed me, and I feel God is right next to me all the time. All the time. Never felt that before. How many of us want that in our lives? See, our souls were created for this. God multiplies what is blessed, doesn't He? And He blesses what is given first, right? So maybe you're feeling a little stuck in your faith journey today. So take a moment, think about it, examine what's first in your life. Don't answer out loud, but is God first in your job? Maybe not. Is God first in your life? Are you being a steward or an owner of your life? Is God first in your home? Are His ways considered in your choices for your home and your life? Is God first in your finances? Is a tithe a part of your life, giving back to God what He's already given to you? Is God first in your gifts and your talents and the things that He's entrusted with you? Have you surrendered those to His will and be willing to do what He's called you to do? Is God first in your time? Are you honoring Him in your activities? Are you honoring Him with your time? Put Him first in the area that you are withholding and watch and see what happens with your faith. It's going to begin to skyrocket and things are going to begin to change, and the floodgates of heaven are going to be able to be poured out upon you. And it's not just about financial blessings. Let me get that straight. That's not even what I'm talking about. It has to do with our life and our stewardship of what God has for us, each and every one of us. It's a lifestyle stewardship. So the first reason, and I'm getting close to being done, I promise. The first reason that we as believers miss out on God's abundance in our lives is we fail to understand that God multiplies what is blessed, and He blesses what is first. And quite often we don't put God first in many of our areas of our lives, right? Let me try that again. And quite often we don't put God first in many areas of our lives, right? Okay, thank you. That's a little better. The second reason that we as believers miss out on God's abundance is that we fail to understand that God multiplies what is given away. God multiplies what is given away. Do you understand that? Think about it. If we look at Matthew's account of the feeding of the 5,000, the story there, it says, and He gave thanks in Matthew 14:19. He gave thanks, He broke the loaves, and He gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the people, right? So where do you think the miracle happened? When you think about this, where did the miracle happen? Was it when Jesus was blessing the food and praying over it? That all of a sudden everybody opened their eyes and like, poof, there's like food for 20,000 people sitting right beside Him. Is that when the miracle happened? There isn't a single mention in any of the four Gospels telling of this story that mentions the multiplication happened right before Jesus blessed it, or even as He blessed it. There wouldn't have been enough bread and fish to feed 20,000 people. It would have been obvious if it was there at the end of the blessing, right? Somebody would have recorded it. I can't believe it. Suddenly there's like loaves of bread stacked all around us. I'm just shocked, right? And there's fish flapping all over the place around here. Sushi for everybody. It's going to be great, right? There wouldn't have been enough to do 20,000 people that way. It would have been so obvious. They would have seen it. It was blessed and poofed, it was everywhere. No, it didn't happen that way. It's not mentioned anywhere. And that would have probably taken at least 2 semi-truckloads full of food to be able to feed all those folks. Here it is. The miracle had to have happened the moment the food left the disciples' hands. You think about it. It had to have been happening as it was being distributed, as it was given away. Because God multiplies what is what? Given away. That's when the blessing began. Last week we spoke about lifestyle stewardship and how it is so opposite to what our culture tells us, right? It's completely counterintuitive to us. You think about it, you'll find life when you lose it, right? In other words, when you give your life away, when you what? Give your life away, you'll find it. We also learned last week that the greatest among you, who wants to be the greatest, needs to lay down his life to serve everybody else, right? You only serve everybody when you give away your status, when you give away your pride, right? It only happens when you're willing to give it away. Last week we talked about love your enemies, right? Do good to those who hate you. Bless those who curse you, right? You only get that blessing from God when you give the opposite of what somebody else is society saying you should be giving to them. It's when you give it away that the blessing happens. Is that making sense? The blessing, it happens. The multiplication of that happens when you give it away, not when you hang on to it super tight. Proverbs 11:24 and 25 says this. It says it so well. One person gives freely, yet gains even more, and another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty. A generous person will prosper. Whoever refreshes others will be refreshed. See, to live an abundant life that God has for us requires us to think and live differently. God multiplies what is blessed, and He multiplies what is given away. Today, Lord, I just pray these moments, these words can penetrate even the heart that doesn't understand it, the heart that doesn't think it, the mind that doesn't grasp it. Lord, I pray that these ideas of what you have taught us, Lord, can really truly sink in deeply in our lives in every area of this balance that has to happen within us, of trusting you, of allowing you, God, to bless us, of allowing us to give away what you've given to us. God, I pray that you would do this in us. With your heads bowed today, I'm going to ask, maybe you're here. Maybe you're here and you would say, you know what, I really struggle with the whole scarcity mindset. The world's lens is where I'm viewing this whole thing, and I look at it through the lens that says there's just not enough. I'm worried, I'm scared, and I need to have God help me change my mindset today. I need to change my mindset today. And if that's you today, I would love to be able to just pray with you and encourage you today together here in this place. Would you say, yeah, Pastor, can you pray for me today? Yeah, thank you. I see that hand. Is there another that would say, yeah, thank you? Is there others? Yeah, I see that one. I see that one. Thank you. Is there others that would say, yes, please pray for me because my mind is saying there's not enough and I know that's not what God has for me. Is there anybody else that would say, Pastor, pray for me? Thank you. Is there another hand that would go up and say, yeah? I just want to know who to be praying for today. I just want to be able to lift you up and encourage you today. Father, you see those who raise their hand, who, God, even admitting that is just difficult. Lord, I pray that you can find within them the ability to capture their heart, to bring the faith and the trust, to trust you, God, to know that you, Lord God, have an abundance mindset and are waiting to release into their lives what you have for them. Because, God, you have so much for them. So much for them, Lord. And when we hold on to things too tightly, we're not giving them away. They can't be blessed. So, God, I pray that you would give each one who is dealing with this scarcity mindset the ability to release it back to you and to put faith and trust to know, God, that you are there. The abundance mind says, I'll multiply it when I give it away. Oh, I'm looking forward, God, to giving it away. Looking forward to seeing you just refresh me and encourage me in every walk, every day, every moment of my life. Thank you.